I'm so glad we finished on time. That was so stressful.
Yeah, I had fun though, and we got $200.
Guys, everyone had such cool stuff to show us.
Howard's had the best food ever.
Yeah, really.
Guys.
Well, we should talk about those interviews though.
They played such good music.
Yeah, they were all really talented musicians.
Guys.
What?
You realize they haven't seen the film yet.
Oh.
You got to go to the people, really, and get that information.
For 7 days.
Well, actually, it was 6.5 days. I'm just saying.
I was going for a thing, but fine. For 6.5 days, we set out to the streets of Omaha.
It was South Omaha, technically.
South Omaha to make the invisible histories visible.
You know what? I'll just take
my
over.
God.
With that being said, a group of filmmakers interviewed musicians, ate amazing food, and worked tirelessly to bring you...
Es inútil que quieras, lo que fue ya no es. Es inútil que quieras comenzar otra vez. Sin rencor ni temores, quiero vivir en paz. Quiero encontrar mi suerte y no dejarla jamás.
Mexican-American music didn't just appear in Omaha. It had to come from somewhere. The culture was brought to us through Mexican immigrants.
They have been here since 1910, though in the 1950s there was a big wave of Mexican immigrants, not only due to the economic effects of the Porfiriato and the violence of the Mexican Revolution, but because of the agricultural, railroad, and stockyard industries in Omaha.
Since then, the culture has grown tremendously through the development of families here in South Omaha.
You know, there's so many cultures, and Omaha's always been kind of an immigrant, town. When you look at the years of the stockyards and all the, the Czechs, all the different, Italians, and then all these different areas, and the Mexicans were there too. And I think some people don't realize a lot of these ethnic groups have been here for a long time. But the Hispanics and the Mexican American community has been here a very, very long time.
So my grandfather, Felix Lara, came from Guanajuato, Mexico. And he came he crossed over with some family members, and he came in search for a better life for his family. And when he came here, he worked, and of course in the fields, and then also on the railroad tracks.
After South Omaha experienced a wave of Mexican immigrants in the 1950s, traditional mariachi music filled the community. Throughout time, Mexican culture and music was showcased in South Omaha.
Well, I live in South Omaha, so music is a very big part of our identity, I feel. Everywhere you go, even in a small restaurant, in a small shop, there's music. There has to be some sort of authentic music playing in the background. When we celebrate, there has to be music. When we cry more passionately to a particular song. When we are stressed, we may have something like a song that identifies that stress.
When you hear the stories from the old timers, the music they got was from the live music, and a lot of it was house parties in the very early years, and then Tampico, and later on Tropicana. My grandfather's time, they were really the main musicians. Those first 3 years, they were kind of the early ones in the 1920s and 30s, and then they had other groups of people that would move around, and the Huertas came in the 40s. He played, and then some more musicians came to the scene, and then you look at the 50s and 60s. As time went on, it started to grow more, and the music expanded to where maybe it was an acoustic in the first year, but then later, as we got, I think, more in the 50s, 60s, it turned more into like a band, like a group, or maybe there were drums, and then the 70s, it went into, this other Tex-Mex type of genre, 70s and 80s. And then from there, you start to see this population surge, and then you start to see more people learning the music and passing it down, and so then you see more musicians, and so that's why now it's just, there's so many, I can't believe how many there are. You can't keep track of them all.
I love that feeling of playing somewhere and playing El Son de la Negra, which is like one of the most traditional mariachi songs, and having people turn their eyes and say, oh my gosh, I know that song.
Mexican-American musicians thrive in and through families. However, like all musicians, the best way to share music is through performing. These artists and mariachi bands began popping up in new and old venues across the city.
Well, I think Howard's, it was always the heart of, having mariachi musicians and just kind of a special feeling, of playing there. And everybody knew everybody. Now there's so many, everybody doesn't know everybody, but back then everybody did. And I think their supportiveness of the arts was always good. So it almost felt like a second home, just going in the restaurant and playing. And, you would play for the people and they liked it. And, they would give you, at the end, you'd have food. And there was something special about that ambience of doing that.
So I actually started playing at Howard's when I was about 12 or 13 years old. That was like my debut with the mariachi group that I was in when I was younger. And it was like a weekly thing. So we had people coming in there like just because there was mariachi music on Fridays. They wouldn't even eat. They would just go listen to the music.
Food and music sort of go together. And wherever there was a really good restaurant, they would have entertainment, some on Wednesday, some on Thursday, and naturally Friday, Saturday.
Everyone has their own reason as to why they are a musician. Most always, it involves the love of performing.
When you're playing an instrument and you're singing, you are connecting on a level that you don't have to touch that person to connect with that person, but if they can hear you sing, they feel it, they feel the music. So
Performing in a live audience is sometimes nerve-wracking, but it's one of the most undescribable sensations I feel that you could have for many reasons. You entertain people, you're doing what you love, and you are just having such a good time doing it. There was one time we were playing at a festival in Lincoln, Nebraska, and something that I like to do a lot when I perform is I like to get close to our audience and interact with them. There was a man in a wheelchair. I'm not sure what was going on with his health, but he couldn't really move, and he couldn't speak. And we were singing this particular song. It was like a love song. It was me and another girl. And I went up to him and I sang to him and I grabbed his hand and he started crying. After that, the man's mother came up to us and she started crying and she thanked us because she said that he felt very special because we gave him that attention.
Throughout the making of the documentary, the filmmakers learned that oftentimes musicians aren't just performing for themselves. They're performing for the people.
Music is universal. It doesn't matter what kind of genre. You can play any style, and that's where you start to connect with people. Like, oh, wow, that's kind of cool. I didn't know you could do that. Do the Nebraska fight song. You going from Rancho Grande into da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And then people are like, wow, and then they start clapping and dancing. So now you've made a connection. How do you connect with the people? It's just not, we can play for ourselves, but I think as an artist, I think what some people don't realize is, yeah, sometimes when you're at your home and do whatever, maybe you record that, you play that for yourself, but then there comes a point when you're a performer, you got to kind of play for them and play for everybody. And that's where it becomes a little fun if you can really get them to relate and have fun with it.
A way that we have to adjust to our audience when we're performing, one of the most noticeable ways that we do it is if we have solely Spanish-speaking audience, we won't perform certain English songs, right? Another thing is, depending on what part of Mexico the audience is from, surprisingly, they have different requests. So if they're from northern Mexico, they're gonna ask for certain songs that represent their states. If they're from southern Mexico, they're gonna ask for other songs that represent their type of music, like sones. Other people prefer ballads or slow songs depending on where they're from. It just kind of depends. So it goes a little bit more than just singing and performing. It's also kind of getting to know who you're playing for so that you can satisfy them when you do perform.
Some musicians get into music because it's part of their family tradition. Other times, a mentor recognizes their talent.
Marcos Mora, big promoter of Mexican and Mexican-American music. My son, Johnny Ray IV, has performed with him on keyboards.
I worked with a lot of kids, so for about 10 years I just worked with them, and then they kind of learned the music, and then so that kind of passed it on to someone else, and now they're all out playing.
it was a talent show that I sang Mexico Lindo y Querido, which is just a song that I learned to perform at the talent show. And I remember that's when Marcos was there and he saw me sing.
He started Las Estrellitas, and I actually began playing with Las Estrellitas when I was 12. They were like my second family growing up because we would spend every weekend together performing at parties, going out of town. Now I look back and I'm grateful because if it wasn't for all the people that he tied me to, I feel like I would not have continued with music.
Marcos kept us going, but now it's up to us to keep the next generation going. So that's kind of where I'm in right now, trying to figure out what can I do to still keep the music alive and to teach the younger generations.
It's important to keep that tradition and that genuine tradition alive, not just halfway.
Music, much like culture, changes and adapts over time. As people stay in America, their music gains a sort of Americanized feel. Many artists want to be unique, so they put a twist on traditional music to create a new sound true to themselves.
The band that I play with, we have a mixture of everything. So it's a lot of young musicians, but we also have older that are very, very traditional. So we like to not mix, but have a combination of both. For example, we have started to even perform like English music in mariachi style. That's something that before it would never really happen. That's one of the biggest changes. Also, like attire has changed and it's evolved.
The more modernized group that I was in was the Las Cecilias. And I feel like just over the years we've modernized more. But we were very, very traditional. But even being a younger generation, we put our own twist to it.
Much like other career paths, women are underrepresented in the Mexican-American music scene. Mariachi music is traditionally dominated by men. The filmmakers sought to hear the female perspective.
I feel that women in Mexican-American music scene, even though there are quite a few artists that could be named out and pinpointed, it's still sort of like we are a minority. A lot of recognition goes to the men or the males that perform. When you think of mariachi specifically, you mostly think of men, in their attire. In Mexican music, though, I feel like women do have a big part of it because a lot of songs are written in a way like a love. So it's either from like the male to a female or the female to a male. So there always has to be that sort of like connection between a guy and a girl within the music.
Growing up and being in groups, because I've been grouped with when there's men and women, so it is challenging at times. When you're in a group together, you try to find a balance and try to be as a team rather than one role overpowering the other. So from what I've experienced, I've never have experienced that where I've felt a minority. Personally, I've never felt as a minority when I've been in a group. And that's probably because I've grown up with the musicians that I've been with since I was young, so that's my personal experience.
One of the biggest ways that women can be more involved and not be seen like such a minority, I guess, and I've seen it, like I've experienced it hands-on, where we will go play somewhere or perform somewhere and men will there's like particular songs that they want a male to sing because it's best suited for a male. I feel like just kind of on the surface level, one of the most influential things you could do is, standing up for those kind of comments or requests and, saying like, hey, I can still perform this song or I can still sing this song, or even just be charge of a group itself. Most of the time it's men who are in charge of the group. It could be also a female that's coordinating and in charge of an ensemble.
Some of the interview subjects had a few words of advice for the filmmakers.
Now, remember, the dear Lord, if he planned it that everyone would play a musical instrument, no one would be in the audience, right? So he gave different talents to different people.
Whatever your passion is, just let that drive you. Don't let other people influence that passion that you have for a particular hobby or thing that you like to do.
Music is an expressive art form through words, instruments, and feeling. There are various reasons for people to have this strong passion.
To me, music is a soulful breath of air.
To me, music is love, passion, and freedom.
To me, music is some way to touch a person's memory, their funny bone, or their heart.
To me, music is finding fulfillment while inspiring the lives of others.
Throughout this documentary, we will walk through the hidden history of Mexican American music in Omaha, Nebraska.
Many of the subjects within this film discussed how music brings people closer together and how it highlights culture in a community.
During the creation of this documentary, we, the filmmakers, definitely bonded over the Mexican American hidden culture in the city we call home. Now, as I was saying, it was a pretty great week.
Yeah, it was honestly really good.
Tengo un libro vacío y lo voy a empezar. Tengo sed de caricias, tengo ganas de amar. Hoy comienza mi vida una página